Your parent just told you they're fine. You asked how they were doing and they said fine. Maybe they said it quickly. Maybe they changed the subject. Maybe they said it in the exact tone they've used your entire life to signal that the conversation is now over. And you let it go because that's what you do. Because they're adults and they said they're fine. But something stayed with you. Not worry exactly. Something more like a question that doesn't quite close. Because the researchers who have spent the last 2 decades studying how older adults communicate with their adult children have found something that should fundamentally change how you hear those 2 words. And once you understand it, your parent saying, "I'm fine," starts to look completely different. The phrase "I'm fine" in older parents has a name in the psychology literature, though not that exact one. It falls under what researchers call burden concealment, a specific, deliberate pattern in which aging parents withhold health information, emotional distress, and the difficulties of daily life from their adult children. The first instinct is to hear that as avoidance, as if something went sideways in the relationship, as if they simply don't trust you enough. A study from the University of Pennsylvania interviewed 50 adults over the age of 65 and found something far more precise. Older parents discussed burden in relation to not wanting to complicate the already busy lives of their adult children, guilt about their own health problems, and a genuine worry that their children were already carrying too much. The concealment isn't emotional distance, it's a deliberate act of protection aimed at the person they love most. What this tells us, and this is the reframe, is that your parent isn't hiding things because they want to keep you out. They're hiding things because they're still trying to take care of you. Psychologists who study family caregiving call it the burden paradox. The parent who most needs support is often the one working hardest to make sure you don't feel responsible for it. The "I'm fine" isn't a wall. It's the same parental instinct that packed your lunch and didn't mention the hard week they were having. It didn't stop at 18. It never stopped. And something worth noting from that same research, this pattern showed up most strongly not in parents who felt distant from their children, but in parents who felt closest to them. Concealment was highest where love was highest. They weren't protecting themselves, they were protecting you. There's a second thing happening underneath "I'm fine." And it explains why the behavior is so consistent across families that it becomes almost invisible. When older parents encounter something genuinely alarming, a symptom they can't explain, a moment of confusion, a fall they didn't mention, something specific happens in how they process the choice to disclose. Researchers at Stanford, through decades of work on what Laura Carstensen called socioemotional selectivity theory, found that as adults age and perceive their time horizon as more limited, their goals shift in a very precise direction. They stop optimizing for information gathering. They start optimizing for emotional meaning and the quality of their closest relationships. For a parent who has spent 60 or 70 years being the one with answers, being the one who handled things quietly, disclosing a health problem to a child isn't just a health conversation. It reorders the emotional architecture of the relationship. It turns them into the one who needs help. And what the research shows is that this shift from caregiver to care recipient is one of the most psychologically costly transitions an older adult can make. Not because of vanity, because parental identity, according to a longitudinal study of 355 older adults published in Frontiers in Psychology, is most strongly reinforced when parents are providing support to their children, not receiving it. The moment they tell you something is wrong, they lose a piece of what has made them feel like themselves for 50 years. "I'm fine" protects the relationship they've spent a lifetime building. In families with more than one adult child, there's almost always one child who hears "I'm fine" less than the others. Not the one who asks most directly, the one who has learned to ask differently, who mentions their own hard week first, who doesn't immediately fix, suggest, or redirect the moment something difficult surfaces. Research on disclosure and family communication is consistent on this point. Older parents share more when sharing feels reciprocal, not a checkup, not a health debrief, when the conversation resembles the kind they once had with a peer rather than an interview with someone who's already preparing a follow-up plan. The "I'm fine" isn't distributed randomly across the family. It goes to whoever the parent expects will escalate, and it quietly fades for whoever has shown over time that they won't. Here's what none of this actually is: simple denial, because the concealment behavior has a neurological and developmental architecture behind it that is surprisingly coherent once you see it. The same Stanford research program found something that upended the popular assumption that aging involves emotional blunting or withdrawal. Older adults, in study after study, showed not diminished emotional processing, but significantly enhanced emotional regulation. They were better, not worse, at managing what they felt internally and what they expressed outward. They had, over decades, developed precisely the skill required to tell you they're fine while holding something else entirely. This wasn't confusion or avoidance, it was mastery, and it was directed at you with intention. There's also the identity layer, which changes what the concealment means at a level deeper than protection alone. A parent who says, "I'm fine," isn't only protecting you from worry. They are, in the language of developmental psychology, protecting the version of themselves that has always been the one who was fine. Role identity research is clear. Older adults who identify primarily as parents, as providers, as the capable ones in the family experience a measurable drop in psychological well-being when they transition into receiving care rather than giving it. "I'm fine" is not just a message to you, it is a message to themselves, a way of staying in the role that has organized their sense of self for longer than you have been alive. Most "I'm fine" parents are not in denial about their situation. But there is one distinction worth understanding because it changes what your response should actually be. Research on aging communication consistently separates two things that look identical from the outside. Parents who conceal because they're actively protecting the relationship, and parents who conceal because they genuinely don't register the severity of what's happening. The first group is making a choice. They know and they're managing the information carefully. The second group may need a different kind of attention altogether. The line between them is clearer than it seems once you know what to look for. A parent who is concealing will often tell you, obliquely, in the second sentence, the thing they mention after "I'm fine." The minor complaint, the offhand comment, the name dropped too casually. They're handing you the door. They're just not opening it for you. What they're waiting for is the question that doesn't make them feel like a patient. So, the next time your parent says, "I'm fine," here's what's actually happening. They have assessed the emotional cost of full disclosure and decided it's higher than they want to place on you right now. They are protecting a parental identity that has been the organizing center of their life for decades. They have developed, over many years, a precise and deliberate skill that allows them to hold real difficulty and present something else entirely to the people they most want to shield. And the instinct behind those two words, the one that makes them reach for "I'm fine" every time, it isn't weakness and it isn't distance. It's the same mechanism that made them stay calm when you were scared and handle hard things without naming them out loud. Your parent isn't saying "I'm fine" because the relationship failed. They're saying it because, even now, their first instinct is still to take care of you. That's not concealment. That's the longest running act of love in your life. If this changed how you hear those two words, subscribe and leave a comment below. Does your parent open up more to one sibling than the others? Because everything we've just described, the protection, the identity, the deliberate withholding, it builds towards something most adult children don't see until something changes. That's the next video.